The ballroom of St. Petersburg's most celebrated estate had never been so silent. 300 guests, counts, countesses, generals, and their jewelled wives all turned at the same moment. Fans stopped mid-flutter. Crystal glasses froze halfway to painted lips. Because Duke Aleksei Voronov, the most powerful, most feared, most desired man in all of Imperial Russia, had just crossed the entire length of the Grand Hall and stopped directly in front of her. Not her elder sister, Vasilisa, the golden-haired beauty every mother in Petersburg had been strategically placing in his path for 3 seasons. Not the ambassador's daughter in the crimson gown, who had practiced her smile in a mirror for 6 years waiting for this exact moment. No, he stopped in front of Zoryanka, the one they whispered about behind silk gloves. The one her own mother had once said, God forgive her, would be difficult to marry off. The one who had arrived tonight only because her father had insisted, and who had spent the last hour pressed against the wall near the potted ferns, counting the minutes until she could disappear back into the carriage. Zoryanka's breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. The Duke was even more terrifying up close. Dark eyes, sharp as a winter blade. A jaw carved from something colder than marble. And yet why was he looking at her like that? Like he had been searching a very long time and had finally found exactly what he was looking for. He said nothing at first. He simply looked at her the way no man in 23 years had ever looked at Zoryanka Bestuzheva. And then he did something that made every woman in that ballroom forget how to breathe. He bowed to her. I believe, Duke Aleksei Voronov said, his voice low, meant only for her ears, carrying the quiet authority of a man who had never once needed to raise it. This next dance belongs to me. Zoryanka's fingers tightened around her modest fan. Her heart was doing something completely unreasonable, because the Duke was not asking, and the look in his eyes was not about dancing. But here is what nobody in that ballroom knew. What Zoryanka herself did not yet know. The Duke had not walked across that hall by accident. He had been watching her, specifically her, for a reason that had nothing to do with beauty or dowry, or the game of Regency courtship that everyone else was playing. He needed her for something far more dangerous than marriage. So tell me, what does a man like Aleksei Voronov want with the daughter everyone forgot to love? And why does Zoryanka feel, deep in the part of her soul she never shows anyone, that her life is about to change in a way she will never be able to undo? If you want to find out what the Duke whispered to her next, what secret he was carrying that brought him to her side of that ballroom, then do one thing for me right now. Hit that subscribe button, because this story is only just beginning, and I promise you, you do not want to miss what happens next. Subscribe, turn on notifications. Zoryanka's story is waiting for you. Zoryanka had not slept the night after the ball. She had lain on her back in the dark, staring at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom, listening to the house settle into its old bones around her, and she had done the one thing she had promised herself she would never do again. She had hoped. It was a dangerous thing for a girl like her. Hope. She had learned that early. At 7 years old, she had hoped her mother would choose her dress for the winter portrait, the way she chose Vasilisa's. Instead, her mother had looked her over once, slowly, the way one examines fruit that has gone slightly past its best, and said, "Wear the grey. It will draw less attention." Zoryanka had worn the grey. She had been wearing versions of grey ever since. She was the second daughter of Count Bestuzhev, a man of decent title and crumbling fortune, who loved his family the way he loved his aging estate, with genuine affection and very little practical attention. He was not a cruel father. He remembered her name, asked about her reading, occasionally patted her on the shoulder when he passed her in the corridor. But he had given the best of his tenderness to Vasilisa long ago, the way most people did, and Zoryanka had accepted her portion without complaint. Vasilisa was everything Petersburg society understood. Tall and fair and effortlessly charming, she moved through rooms the way candlelight moves through crystal, drawing every eye without appearing to try. She was not unkind to Zoryanka, not exactly, but there is a particular cruelty in indifference from someone who has everything you were told you could never have, and Vasilisa practiced it without ever knowing she did. It was Vasilisa who should have caught the Duke's attention last night. Everyone had agreed on that. Their mother had spent 3 weeks engineering the evening, the placement at dinner, the colour of Vasilisa's gown, the subtle arrangement of introductions. 3 weeks of careful architecture, and all of it had collapsed the moment Aleksei Voronov walked past her golden sister without a single glance and crossed the room to stand before Zoryanka instead. Zoryanka, who had been trying to become part of the wallpaper. She pressed her fingers against her lips in the dark of her room and tried to remember exactly what his eyes had looked like. Not the way a woman remembers a handsome man. She was too practical for that. Too many years of careful self-management. She was trying to remember because something in his expression had not made sense, and things that did not make sense frightened her more than things that did. He had not looked at her with the mild curiosity men sometimes offered her before moving on. He had not looked at her the way she was used to being looked at, that particular brand of polite dismissal dressed up as civility. He had looked at her the way someone looks at the answer to a question they have been carrying for a very long time. And that was what kept her awake. Because men like Aleksei Voronov did not wander. They did not act without reason. He was not a young lord, drunk on champagne and novelty. He was 31 years old, a decorated officer of the imperial court, a man whose decisions shaped policy and whose silences shaped fear. He had walked across that ballroom with the focused intention of someone who had already made up his mind long before he arrived, which meant he had known she would be there. And somehow that was more unsettling than anything else. By morning, the house was already in chaos. She could hear her mother's voice from 2 floors below, sharp and fast, speaking in that clipped tone she only used when something had disrupted her understanding of how the world was supposed to work. Footsteps crossed the ceiling above. A door shut too hard. Zoryanka rose, dressed herself, without calling for her maid. She had always preferred it that way, and sat at the small desk by the window where she did most of her thinking. The frost on the glass had made strange patterns overnight, branching and curling like something alive. She traced one with her finger without thinking. She had a feeling, low and quiet in her chest, the kind that does not announce itself but simply sits there, patient and certain. Something had shifted last night, not in the ballroom, not even in the moment the Duke had bowed to her. Something had shifted inside her. In the locked, careful place she had built over years of grey dresses and forgotten names and second-best portions of love. It had shifted, just slightly, like a door that has always been sealed, moving a single inch on its hinge. And now she could feel the cold air coming through. She did not know yet whether to be terrified or grateful. She did not know yet that she was about to become both. Because somewhere across the city of St. Petersburg, in a house that made her father's estate look like a cottage, Duke Aleksei Voronov was already giving instructions. And her name was in every one of them. She heard her mother before she saw her. The door to Zoryanka's room opened without a knock, the way it always did, as though the small courtesy of announcing oneself had never applied to the second daughter. Her mother swept in wearing her morning robe and an expression Zoryanka had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not disappointment, those she knew well. This was something closer to calculation, wearing the mask of excitement, and it made Zoryanka sit up straighter without meaning to. Her mother's name was Countess Irina Bestuzheva, and she was a woman who had once been a great beauty and had never entirely forgiven the world for letting that change. She had transferred all her ambitions into Vasilisa, the way one pours everything precious into a single vessel. And for years it had seemed like a reasonable arrangement. Vasilisa would marry brilliantly. The family finances would recover. Irina's legacy would be secured. It was a clean, logical plan. Last night had complicated it considerably. She sat down on the edge of Zoryanka's bed without being invited and looked at her second daughter with those sharp, pale eyes that missed very little and forgave even less. Duke Voronov's man came this morning, she said. Zoryanka said nothing. She had learned young that silence was often the safest first response. He is requesting a formal visit this afternoon. Her mother paused, letting the weight of it sit in the air between them. For you. The frost outside the window had not melted. The room felt very still. Zoryanka kept her face arranged into something neutral, which took more effort than it should have. Did he say why? She asked. Her mother's expression flickered. Men like Aleksei Voronov do not explain themselves. They arrive and they expect the world to rearrange around them. She smoothed the fabric of her robe across her knee, a habit she had when she was thinking hard. What did you say to him last night? What did you do? And there it was, the accusation wrapped in a question. The implication that something must have been engineered, manipulated, because the alternative that he had simply chosen Zoryanka freely, without prompting, was too disorienting for her mother to accept as its own fact. I said nothing remarkable, Zoryanka answered. We danced. He asked me questions about the city. I answered them. What questions? About the older districts. The history of certain buildings near the river. I did not think it was significant. Her mother stared at her for a long moment with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle where several pieces seemed to belong to an entirely different box. Then she stood, and the calculation in her eyes sharpened into something Zoryanka recognized and trusted far less than anger. You will receive him, her mother said. It was not a suggestion. You will wear the blue dress, not the grey. You will be agreeable and warm, And you will not say anything peculiar about history or buildings or any of the other things you fill your head with." She moved toward the door. "And Zoryanka." She stopped without turning, her voice dropping into something quieter and therefore more serious. "Do not mistake this for something it may not be. Men like him visit for reasons that are not always what they appear. Whatever he wants, you will listen, and then you will come and tell me everything." She left. The door clicked shut. Zoryanka sat very still in the silence that followed and felt something she had not expected. Not excitement. Not the warmth that might have been appropriate for a young woman being visited by the most sought-after man in Petersburg society. What she felt was a slow, creeping unease, like the feeling that arrives just before a storm, when the air changes and the birds go quiet. She thought about what her mother had said. Not the part about the blue dress. The other part. Whatever he wants. Not whatever he feels or however he admires you. Her mother had chosen that word with the precision she applied to everything, and she had not said it carelessly. She had said it like a woman who suspected that this visit had less to do with courtship and more to do with something she had not yet been able to name, which meant her mother was frightened. And Irina Bestuzheva was frightened of very few things. By the time the Duke's carriage arrived that afternoon, Zoryanka had changed into the blue dress and arranged herself in the front sitting room with a book she had no intention of reading. Vasilisa had positioned herself in the adjoining room with the door conveniently ajar under the thin pretense of embroidery. Their mother sat beside Zoryanka like a woman waiting for a verdict. Aleksei Voronov walked in and filled the room the way certain people do, not through noise or movement, but through something harder to name, a kind of gravity that rearranges the air around it. He looked at Zoryanka first, only Zoryanka, and then he said something that made her mother's teacup stop halfway to her lips and made Vasilisa's embroidery hoop go completely silent in the next room. He said, "I would like to speak with your daughter alone. Not a request, not quite a command. Something in between, spoken with the calm certainty of a man who had already decided that whatever obstacles existed between his intention and its outcome were simply inconveniences he had not yet addressed." Her mother opened her mouth. He looked at her then, just briefly, with those dark and utterly unreadable eyes. Her mother closed her mouth, and Zoryanka understood in that precise moment that the locked and careful world she had built around herself was not going to survive this man's attention. The only question, the one that would follow her into everything that came next, was whether what replaced it would save her, or destroy her completely. The door closed behind her mother with the reluctant precision of someone who had been outmaneuvered and knew it. Zoryanka did not look at the door. She looked at him. He had taken the chair across from her, not beside her, which she noted. There was a deliberateness to everything he did, she was beginning to understand. Nothing was careless, nothing was accidental. He sat with the ease of a man completely comfortable with silence, and he looked at her the same way he had across the ballroom directly, without performance, without the social softening most people applied when they were uncertain of their welcome. She was not going to wait for him to begin. She had spent enough of her life waiting in rooms for other people to decide what she was worth. "You did not come here to court me," she said. Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise exactly, more like confirmation. "No," he said, "not in the way you mean." "Then say what you mean." He was quiet for a moment, and in that moment she studied him the way she studied everything she did not yet understand carefully, without revealing that she was doing it. He was not a comfortable man to look at directly, not because he was unpleasant, but because there was something in his face that demanded honesty in return, and honesty had always cost Zoryanka more than other things. "Your father's estate," he said finally. "The land along the Neva's eastern tributary. There is a section of it that borders property the Crown has been attempting to acquire for 2 years. Your father has refused every offer." She felt the shape of something clarifying in her mind, the way objects become distinct when your eyes adjust to a dark room. "You want the land," she said. "I want to protect the land," he said, and the distinction in his voice was slight but real. "There are men at court who want it for reasons that would be catastrophic for everyone who lives within 30 miles of it. Your father doesn't understand what he's sitting in the middle of, and I do not have the political means to approach him directly without drawing exactly the kind of attention that would accelerate the problem." Zoryanka looked at him steadily. "So you need access to my father through me?" "I need someone inside that house who understands what to listen for and is not already compromised by what they stand to gain." He paused. "You were the only person at that ball last night who spent the evening watching rather than performing. That tells me something." She should have been insulted. She recognized that. He was essentially confirming that his interest in her was strategic rather than personal, that she had been observed and selected the way one selects a useful instrument. Every reasonable instinct she had told her to stand up, call her mother back into the room, and end this conversation with the cold civility it deserved. She did not stand up, because underneath the insult was something she had not expected, something she had to be very honest with herself about in the privacy of her own chest. He had looked at her and seen something worth using. And for a woman who had spent her entire life being seen as something not worth noticing at all, even that was a complicated kind of recognition. She hated that it mattered. She noted that it did anyway. "Who are these men you're speaking of?" she said. "One of them," he said quietly, "is someone your father considers a close friend." The room seemed to rearrange itself slightly around that sentence. She thought of her father, with his genuine affections and his lack of practical attention, moving through his days with the comfortable trust of a man who had never had serious cause to doubt the people around him. She thought of how exposed that made him, how completely he would not see it coming. "Tell me his name," she said. "Not yet." Her eyes sharpened. "If you want my help, you cannot manage what I know and expect me to be useful with half the information." "I can and I will," he said, without apology and without cruelty, "until I know whether trusting you completely is something I can afford to do." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. She almost respected it. She also found it profoundly infuriating, which she suspected was partly his intention to see how she handled the frustration, whether it made her reckless or whether it made her sharper. She chose sharp. "What do you need from me right now?" she said, specifically. The corner of his mouth moved. Barely. "Your father has a gathering planned for next week. I need an invitation." "You're a duke. You could invite yourself." "I could, and then whoever is watching would know exactly why I was there." He looked at her steadily. "If I come as a man paying attention to you, I am simply another predictable story. No one looks twice at a courtship." There it was, the full shape of it now, clear and cold and clever. She was not just access, she was cover. The unremarkable daughter, the one people looked through rather than at, made useful precisely because of everything they had dismissed about her. She stood up. He watched her, very still. She walked to the window and looked out at the white street below, at the carriages moving through the afternoon frost, at the ordinary world continuing its ordinary business, completely unaware that something was shifting in this sitting room that she could not undo once she agreed to it. She thought about her father, about the land, about the unnamed man who called himself a friend. She thought about herself, which she did rarely and with great care, about what it meant that her first real moment of consequence in 23 years was being handed to her, wrapped in danger, and dressed as something else entirely. She turned back to face him. "Next week," she said, "I will arrange it." He nodded once, and she saw it again, that look from the ballroom, the one she had been trying to decode since the night before. It was not admiration, not precisely. It was something quieter and in some ways more valuable. It was respect, which was the most dangerous thing he could have offered her, because she already knew, with the certainty of someone who has been careful their whole life and felt it crumbling for the first time, that she would burn the world down before she let him take it back. The gathering was held on a Thursday. Zoryanka had spent the 6 days before it doing what she did best. She listened. She moved quietly through the house, through meals and corridors and the small social calls her mother arranged, and she gathered information the way water gathers in low places without effort, without announcement, simply by being the person no one thought to guard themselves against. She had learned the unnamed man's name by the 3rd day, Prince Lev Strelnikov. She had known him her entire life. He had been coming to their house since before she could remember, a large and jovial man with a loud laugh and small eyes that laughed slightly less than his mouth did. He called her father by a shortened version of his name that no one else used. He had once given her a book for her birthday when she was 12, which she had been grateful for until she realized it was the same book he had given Vasilisa the year before. He was the kind of man who made generosity feel like an accounting system. She had watched him differently after Aleksei told her. And what she saw, now that she was looking with different eyes, was that Prince Strelnikov asked her father questions. Constant, casual, friendly questions about the estate, the land, the finances, the kind of questions that felt like conversation and functioned like excavation. She had said nothing to her father. Not yet. Aleksei had been clear about that. Any shift in her father's behavior towards Strelnikov would signal that something had changed, and they were not ready for that signal to be sent. She had agreed. She had not entirely made peace with agreeing. Aleksei arrived at the gathering as arranged. He was announced with the kind of formal wait that briefly silenced the room, and then the room recovered and moved around him in that particular way of people pretending not to watch someone they cannot stop watching. He found her within minutes, which she noticed. He was good at not appearing to move with purpose while moving with complete purpose. "He's here," she said quietly when he reached her side. She did not look at Strelnikov directly. She had learned not to. "I see him," Aleksei said, equally quiet. "Your father?" "In the east room with the older guests. He doesn't know yet that Strelnikov arrived." They stood together near the tall windows, and to anyone observing them, they were simply a man paying court and a woman receiving it. Her mother kept glancing over with an expression that had been shifting for days between cautious hope and deep suspicion. Vasilisa had stopped pretending to be indifferent. Neither of them mattered right now. "There's something else," Zoryanka said. He turned his head slightly toward her. "Strelnikov brought someone with him, the man in the grey coat near the fireplace. I don't recognize him, but he has been watching you since you walked in, and he has not spoken to a single other person." A pause, imperceptible to anyone but her. "You're certain?" he said. "I have been the person no one watches for 23 years, she said. "I am very certain." Something shifted in his expression. The focused, controlled exterior he wore like armour developed a single hairline fracture, there and then gone. "We need to move faster than I planned," he said. Before she could respond, her father appeared from the east room, saw Aleksei at her side, and began crossing toward them with the open pleasure of a man who found this development both surprising and delightful. And behind her father, moving with the unhurried ease of a man who owned time, came Prince Lev Strelnikov. Zoryanka felt the moment compress. Because she could see what was about to happen before it happened. Her father would make introductions, Strelnikov would charm the room the way he always did, and the man in the grey coat would watch Alexei's reaction to Strelnikov, and whatever he saw would be reported, and whatever was reported would end everything Aleksei had been building before it had the chance to matter. She had perhaps 15 seconds. She did something she had never done in her life. She made a decision in the open, without privacy, without time to think it all the way to its edges. She stepped forward and greeted Strelnikov first, warmly. With a smile she constructed from memory, using every version of Vasilisa she had observed over a lifetime. She took his attention completely, asking about his journey, his health, complimenting something inconsequential about his coat with enough sincerity to hold him in conversation for the precise amount of time it took Aleksei to exchange a word with her father and maneuver them both 2 steps to the left, out of the grey-coated man's direct sightline. Strelnikov looked at her with those small, under-laughing eyes and said, "My dear Zoryanka, I don't think I've ever seen you so animated." "I've had reason to be," she said, and smiled again. It worked. The moment passed. The grey-coated man shifted his gaze. But Strelnikov kept looking at her a beat too long. And in that extra beat, something in his expression changed. The jovial warmth thinned slightly, the way ice thins over deep water, still appearing solid from the surface. He knew, not everything, but enough. He had looked at her standing beside Aleksei, had watched her redirect his attention with practiced ease, and some instinct, honed by years of his own calculated friendships, had registered that the unremarkable second daughter was no longer unremarkable. She held his gaze and did not let hers waver. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the house had settled, she sat with Aleksei in the small library while the fire burned low, and told him everything she had seen in Strelnikov's face. He listened without interrupting. Then he was quiet for a long time. "You understand what this means?" he said finally. "It means we have less time than we thought. It means," he said, looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, something that lived in the same neighborhood as fear without quite being it, "that you are no longer safe simply by being overlooked." The fire cracked. Outside the window, Petersburg sat in its cold and glittering indifference. She had spent her whole life invisible and called it safety. She understood now, sitting in the low light with the truth of it settling into her bones, that she had already made the choice that could not be unmade. Not tonight, not in the 15 seconds in the drawing room. She had made it the moment she had stopped waiting for the world to see her and started deciding what she would do about it herself. "I know," she said quietly, and meant it without regret. Even though somewhere across the city, in whatever room Prince Lev Strelnikov now occupied, her name was very likely already being spoken, in a tone that had nothing to do with indifference. 3 days after the gathering, her father's oldest friend made his move. It was not dramatic. That was what she had not anticipated. She had been bracing for something she could see coming, something loud enough to act against. Instead, it arrived the way poison arrives, quietly and already inside the house before anyone thought to check. Her father came to breakfast looking pale. He sat down, did not reach for his tea, and stared at the table with the expression of a man who has been shown something he cannot unsee. Zoryanka watched him from across the table. Her mother was talking about something irrelevant. Vasilisa was not yet downstairs. "Papa," she said. He looked up, and she saw it immediately, the particular devastation of a trusting man discovering that his trust was inventory someone else had been quietly liquidating for years. Strelnikov had gone to him directly. She pieced it together over the next hour, sitting with her father in his study while he talked in the halting, fractured way of someone still assembling their own understanding of what had happened. Strelnikov had presented documents. Legal documents, old ones, contracts her father had signed years ago without the thorough reading they deserved, during a period when the estate's finances had been at their most precarious, and Strelnikov's friendly assistance had felt like salvation. The documents, read correctly, and in the sequence Strelnikov had now arranged them, suggested that a significant portion of the eastern land had been used as surety against a debt her father did not remember framing in those terms. It was constructed. She could see the construction of it clearly. But constructed things, when built carefully enough and backed by the right signatures, became indistinguishable from truth. She sent word to Aleksei within the hour. He arrived before noon, and this time he did not sit across from her. He stood at her father's desk and read every document her father placed before him with the focused attention of a man whose mind worked faster than his expression revealed. Her father sat to one side, diminished in a way that made something in her chest pull tight. He was not a naive man, her father. He was simply a man who had loved people more than he had protected himself, and she had inherited enough of that quality to understand exactly how it had happened. Aleksei set the last document down. 3 of these are legitimate, he said. The other 2 have been altered. The original versions still exist. I have access to them. Her father looked up. How? Because Strelnikov has been attempting this with other estates along the same tributary for 4 years, and I have been collecting evidence for 3 of them." He said it without satisfaction, without the tone of a man who had been waiting to deliver a winning hand. He said it simply as a fact, which was somehow worse and better at the same time. I did not move sooner because I needed him to overextend. I needed him to reach for too much at once. The room was quiet. Her father said, "You used my land as bait." Aleksei met his eyes. Yes, it was the right answer. It was the only answer a man like her father could have respected. And she watched her father understand that, watched him weigh the honesty against the cost of it, and arrive somewhere complicated and ultimately forgiving. She loved her father for that. She always had. The days that followed moved fast, and then suddenly very slow. Aleksei presented the documents to the correct people through the correct channels, and Prince Lev Strelnikov, who had spent decades perfecting the art of being indispensable to everyone who mattered, discovered that indispensability has a very short life. Once the people who matter begin comparing their private conversations with one another, he did not disappear loudly. There was no public ruin, no dramatic fall. He simply became, over the course of 2 weeks, a man whose invitations were lost in transit and whose visits were met with unfortunate scheduling conflict. It was the most Petersburg of endings. She recognized it and accepted it, even though some part of her had wanted something louder, something proportionate to what he had tried to do to her father. But she was learning that real consequences rarely performed for an audience. They simply closed doors, quietly, permanently, one after another, until a man found himself in a house with no exits he recognized. Vasilisa came to her room on a Wednesday evening without her usual careless confidence. She sat on the end of the bed and was quiet for long enough that Zoryanka looked up from the book she was not really reading. "I didn't know," Vasilisa said, "about any of it." "I know," Zoryanka said. "You should have told me." "I didn't know if I could." Vasilisa looked at her with an expression Zoryanka had never seen on her sister's face before. Something stripped of performance, raw at the edges. "Has it always been like this? Have you always been doing things like this, quietly, while the rest of us looked the other way?" Zoryanka considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Not like this," she said, "but yes, quietly, yes." Her sister nodded slowly, the nod of someone revising a long-held understanding. It was not a reconciliation, not entirely, but it was a beginning, and beginning was more than they had managed in years. Aleksei came on a Friday afternoon without his formal bearing, without the armoured composure she had come to recognize as his default against the world. He sat across from her in the same small library where the fire had burned low 3 weeks ago, and he looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. "I told you at the start that I didn't know if trusting you completely was something I could afford," he said. "I remember. I was wrong in my framing." He said it carefully, like a man unaccustomed to this particular kind of sentence. "It was never about what I could afford. I was protecting myself from something I hadn't expected." She waited. "You," he said simply. The fire was steadier tonight. Outside the window, Petersburg was doing what it always did, glittering coldly and magnificently, and entirely indifferent to the small human moments happening inside its walls. She thought about the girl who had stood against the wallpaper near the potted ferns 3 weeks ago, counting the minutes until she could disappear. She thought about grey dresses and careful invisibility and the locked place inside her that had felt a cold draught move through it the morning after the ball. The door on its hinge had opened fully now. She could feel it. She looked at Aleksei Voronov, this complicated and precise and unexpectedly honest man, and she felt something settle in her, quiet and certain, the way true things settle when you finally stop arguing with them. "You should have led with that," she said. His mouth curved, slowly, like something long held still, finally being allowed to move. "I'm aware," he said, and for the first time in her life, Zoryanka Bestuzheva did not arrange her face into something careful. She simply let him see her, all of her, plainly, without the grey. 2 months after Prince Lev Strelnikov became a man without doors, Aleksei Voronov asked her father for permission to court her formally. Her father said yes before Alexei had finished the sentence. She heard about it afterward from her father himself, who recounted it with the slightly dazed happiness of a man who had recently survived something and found the world on the other side of it unexpectedly beautiful. He had looked at Alexei across his desk, her father said, and felt something he could only describe as relief, as though a thing had been moving toward its right place for a long time and had finally arrived. Zoryanka understood that feeling. She had been living inside it for weeks. The courtship was not what Petersburg expected. People had constructed a story about it already, the way they always did, filling the gaps of what they did not know with what made the most satisfying shape. The prevailing version was that the Duke had been captivated by some hidden beauty in the overlooked daughter, that it was a romantic accident, a matter of the heart overruling the head. Women at gatherings told it to each other with great feeling. It was a comfortable story. It required nothing difficult from the people telling it. The truth was both simpler and harder than that. He had come to her for strategic reasons and stayed for ones he had not planned. She had agreed to help him for her father's sake and discovered in the process that she had a self-worth fighting for. Neither of them had intended any of it. Both of them had arrived at it anyway, through honesty and friction and the particular intimacy of having seen each other clearly under pressure, which is a more durable foundation than most people ever build on. She knew this. She also knew that the comfortable story Petersburg was telling would follow her into every room for the rest of her life, and she had made a quiet decision about that. She would let them have their story, and she would know the real one. That was enough. What she had not anticipated was the letter. Not from Strelnikov, not from anyone connected to the events of the previous weeks. It came from a woman she had never met, the widow of one of the other landowners Strelnikov had targeted in the years before he reached her father. The woman had heard, through the particular underground of people who share information when official channels fail them, that Zoryanka had been involved in what had happened. She did not write with gratitude exactly. She wrote with recognition. One careful woman to another, acknowledging that something had been seen and done in the quiet that the loud world would never fully account for. Zoryanka read it twice, and then sat with it for a long time. She wrote back. It was the beginning of something she did not have a name for yet, a correspondence that would widen over the following months into a small and serious network of women in similar positions, managing similar invisibilities, protecting people the official structures had no interest in protecting. It was not rebellion. It was not political in any language the court would have recognized. It was simply women using what they had always used: attention, patience, the willingness to be underestimated, and turning it towards something that mattered. Aleksei found out about it gradually, the way one finds out about rivers, first noticing the sound, then the direction, then the full scope of what has been moving quietly all along. He said nothing for several days after he understood it completely. Then, one evening, he looked at her across the library table and said, "You are going to be considerably more difficult to be married to than I originally calculated." "You should have calculated more carefully," she said, without looking up from what she was reading. The silence that followed was warm. The kind of silence that has stopped being empty. The formal engagement was announced in early spring. Petersburg received it with the enthusiasm of a city that loves a story, and the story they loved was the romantic accident, the hidden beauty, the Duke undone by an overlooked girl. Vasilisa stood beside her at the announcement gathering and squeezed her hand once, briefly, with a pressure that said several things that words between them had not yet managed. Their mother wept with the complicated relief of a woman who had doubted the wrong daughter for too long and knew it, and was beginning, slowly, to reckon with what that meant. Her father danced with her before dinner. He was not a graceful dancer. He had never been. But he held her with the full attention he had not always managed when she was young, and he said quietly into the music, "I see you, Zoryanka. I think I always did, in my poor way. I'm sorry it wasn't enough sooner." She rested her head against his shoulder for a single moment, the way she had wanted to when she was 7 years old in the grey dress. "It's enough now, Papa," she said. And meant it? Later that evening, she stood at the window of the estate's upper gallery, looking out at Petersburg arranging itself in the blue spring dusk, the spires and the river, and the cold light turning golden at its edges for the first time since autumn. She thought about the girl at the wall near the potted ferns. She thought about grey dresses and locked doors, and the particular loneliness of being in a room full of people who look past you so consistently that you begin to wonder if you exist in the same substance as everything else. She existed. She had always existed. It had simply taken the right pressure, applied at the right moment, to show her the shape of herself clearly. Aleksei appeared beside her quietly, the way he moved, without announcement, fitting into the space beside her as though it had been measured for him. "What are you thinking?" he said. She considered the question honestly. Outside the window, the city glittered and moved and continued its magnificent indifference, and she felt for the first time in her life completely unbothered by it. "That I want to see what comes next," she said. He looked at her in the golden light, and the expression on his face was the one she had been trying to decode since the ballroom. The one she understood now was simply this: a man looking at the one thing in his life that had refused to be managed, and being profoundly grateful for it. "So do I," he said, and the spring light held them both for a moment, easy and unhurried, before the city asked anything of them again. And now, my dear viewers, I have a question for you. Did Zoryanka ever imagine, standing at that wall near the potted ferns, that the night would end with a duke bowing at her feet, and a life she had never permitted herself to want suddenly within reach? Did you see her coming? Did you see any of it coming? Because, I have to tell you, this is the kind of story that does not let go easily, the kind that sits with you after the screen goes dark and makes you think about every grey dress you have ever worn and every room you have ever stood at the edge of, wondering if you were allowed to take up more space. Zoryanka's story is complete. But the world she helped build, the quiet network, the women with their careful attention and their patient power, that story is only beginning. And if you want to be there when it unfolds, you know what to do. Subscribe to this channel. Turn on your notifications so you never miss a single part. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who has been standing near the potted ferns long enough. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching, for staying, for caring about a girl in a grey dress who refused, in the end, to disappear. You are the reason stories like this get told. Now stay close, because what comes next is going to be worth every second.